good morning to everyone, and welcome to this Governing Conversations webinar dedicated to cybersecurity in the Global South and organized jointly by the Center for Technology and Society at FGV, the Yale ISP project, and the Digital Interests Lab at New York University. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. My name is Luca Belli. I'm professor at FGV Law School, where I coordinate the Center for Technology and Society at FGV, and I direct the Cyber Brics project. Today, I have the great pleasure to have with me an incredible set of panelists, starting with Vanessa Copeci-Crao, who is a telecom regulation specialist at Anatel, the Brazilian telecom regulator, and also part of the cybersecurity technical group of Anatel. Then we will have Mohamed Toki, who is senior judge at the Council of State of Egypt and also the chairman of the International Association of Cybercrime Prevention. And last but of course not least, Andrea Calderaro, who is director of the Center for Center for Internet and Global Politics, and also professor at the European University Institute in Florence. Now, before we get started, let me just briefly introduce this debate with a couple of considerations of why we thought about organizing this debate, and also another one in a couple of weeks on cybersecurity in the Brics countries. Well, the very basic consideration is that over the past 2 decades, there has been an enormous change in the both in the demographics and also in the centers of normative production and technological production when we look at cyberspace. In the first decade of the 2000s, we had a cyberspace whose population, if we can say so, was made up primarily of individuals connected from so-called developed country, the richest country of the world, Europe, North America, some countries in Oceania, Western countries. Now, this has dramatically changed over the past decade. Now, the largest part of the cyberspace population comes from the Global South, from countries that are not the traditional Western countries, or at least those who may qualify as Western countries. And this has created an incredible change in the center of all the politics, policies, norms, and technology elaboration. So to date is very ineffective, biased, and ultimately incorrect to only consider cybersecurity from a global north perspective, because we miss the most relevant part of the cyberspace in terms of dimensions, but also in terms of projections. What is going to be even more relevant in terms of connected population, technological production, and normative production? Now, the challenge of today, and through a lesser extent, but also of the next webinar on cybersecurity in the Brics, will be precisely to tackle these two levels of complexity. On the one hand, cybersecurity itself is an enormously complex and multifaceted item. We speak about security and protection of information, both private, personal, and non-personal information, protection of infrastructures, not only digital infrastructure for connectivity, but also increasingly conventional infrastructures that are connected, like the urban architectures of smart cities or smart grids, but also democratic infrastructures that increasingly rely on digital infrastructure to function. But also then we have all the services that over the past year of pandemics have been digitized, and the good functioning of virtually all private and public services we utilize rely on digital technology and on the security on such technologies. And then there is this transversal preoccupation, normative preoccupation, which is cybercrime, the main tool we have at our disposal to regulate and try to avoid bad faith actors and bad faith behaviors and cyber threats. Now, to this first thematic complexity, we have to add another complexity of our today's very ambitious workshop, which is speaking about Global South, which is a very diverse collection of countries, not only geographically, not only in terms of demographics, but in terms of diversity of political and normative systems. Now, we can, in this very large collection of countries that spans 4 different continents, we can find some common traits. Some of them, well, most of them are former colonies. And this does not only mean that they have inherited the enormous inequality that former colonial regimes imposed, but also they have inherited normative and institutional systems that are very similar to those of the previous colonizers. And so they allow to have some sort of legal interoperability based on that similarity. We have also countries that either have experienced, they are very recent democracies, so they either have experienced in very recent decades authoritarian regimes right after their independence, or they are still experiencing it. So that is a very important feature that we have to consider when we speak about cybersecurity and sustainable governance of cybersecurity. And then last but not least, given the lower level of wealth and of income, and also the lower, sadly, the lower life expectancy, in these countries we have much younger populations, which is a very interesting feature when we speak about digital technology, because it means that adoption of new technology is much easier, if you want, when the population is much younger. And on the one hand, it's not only a matter of more consumers, it's also a matter of more producers of innovation and of solutions. So we have this tension of both having an enormously diverse set of new issues and problems on the one hand, but also of solutions on the other. So that is the enormous complexity that we very ambitiously aim at tackle today, with some key example. Of course, we do not, we perfectly know we will not be exhaustive in our presentations and discussions, but we will take into consideration some key examples, not only of problems and concerns in the Global South, but also of success stories from the Global South. Now, no one better than our friend Vanessa Copecicavo can start with this, telling us a little bit about the recent advancement of the cybersecurity governance at the Brazilian level, particularly with regard to cybersecurity in the telecoms infrastructure. Please, Vanessa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Luca. It's indeed a pleasure to be here. And after this not only excellent introduction, but also very accurate overview of what are the challenges and of the Global South, I'm just going to share a little bit of the Brazilian developments in this arena, and also a little bit of the Global Cybersecurity Index, and also with some brand new news on this matter. So I'm just going to share my screen, and I hope you are already seeing it. Can you see it? Oh, perfect. So thank you very much. So the idea here is just to tell you about, to give you an overview of the cybersecurity related policies and recent developments in Brazil, so you can understand why we achieve such finally just also share a little bit about the cybersecurity regulation for the telecommunication sector. So Brazil has been working to develop a series of documents and frameworks in the past few years. So first, we have to mention the Brazilian National Information Security Policy, which is a presidential decree that was approved in the end of 2018. And it establishes that the national cybersecurity component is one of the main modules of the information security. So after that, the first module of the information security stretched strategy was approved, and we have the Brazilian National Cybersecurity Strategy in the beginning of 2020. This also, it has the objectives, the vision that the federal government wants to achieve, and in the respect of the cyber domain, and also has a series of 10 strategic actions that should guide every entity and every or body of the federal public administration. Not only that, we also have the accession to the Budapest Convention, which is a main achievement for Brazil, and it was approved by the Congress, by the Brazilian Congress in the end of last year, so in the end of December of 2021. We also have been seeing a series of developments in the sector of critical infrastructure. So we have first, the financial sector in Brazil that has enacted some specific we have also.
Yeah. Sorry, we lost your audio for a couple of 5 seconds. Sorry.
Okay, so can you hear me now? Well. Okay, so we have also been experiencing in Brazil the development of sector regulation. We have the first one was financial, the second one telecommunication sector, and finally, and more recently, the energy sector. Another, in terms of capacity development, something that also has been going on in Brazil since 2018 is a national cyber drill exercise. Something that is conducted by the Ministry of Defense and also by the Cyber Defense Command in Brazil, and also with the Cabinet of Security, Institutional Security in Brazil. And the reason that I mention all these important developments is because this is why we have achieved the 18th position in the ranking. They reflect these major developments. They reflect in the position of Brazil in the Global Cybersecurity Index, which is something that we are going to address later. So in this spirit of having and enacting cybersecurity regulation, we do have one specific for the telecommunication sector. And this regulation, it sets principles and guidelines for the providers, and also it creates the cybersecurity technical group, which is something to be the locus for all cybersecurity discussions within the telecommunication sector. And also it contains a set of mandatory provisions for the providers. As mandatory provisions, for example, it sets that the companies, the providers, they do have to have a cybersecurity policy to address its governance on this matter. They do have to publicate the general provisions of this policy on their site. They have to notify the agency. This is something very important about relevant incidents on the network. They have to share information with the service providers, and this is something that Anatel is not in the ecosystem, because we wanted to foster the information sharing without the which is important when it comes to cybersecurity. We also have a look to the supplier chain. So the suppliers of the providers, they also have to have a cybersecurity policy, and they have to go to audit processes. We also have a look to the equipment, so they have to change the standard authentication configuration of the equipment that they provide to the user, because here is where a big range of vulnerability is set in the equipments. Also, they have to go to vulnerability assessment cycle, and they have to report on critical infrastructure. When it comes to the cybersecurity group, which is something that was created by the regulation, they come with a very large list of attributions of a very wide mandate, which include to follow up the compliance of the cybersecurity policy. They have to develop the definitions needed for the implementation of all this mandatory provisions. We have to follow up the information sharing procedure. We have to outreach and engage with relevant entities and bodies, internalize best practice and standards. We have also a role on capacity building, awareness initiatives, and the development of studies. And reaching about the cybersecurity global index, which is something that we are quite proud to achieve in the last edition, the 18th position. It's important to understand what this index measures, and it measures the commitment of the countries to the ITU, International Telecommunications Agenda. And this framework, the GCI framework, cybersecurity agenda, it says that to address the cybersecurity challenges, which was something that Luca was describing in the introduction, we have to address, because it's a multi-faced, multi-dimension problem, we have to address in 5 pillars. We have to address with legal measures, and here we have to address cybercrime. We have to address technical measures, so we have, for example, to have a CSIRT, a national CSIRT. We have to have standards. We have to these CSIRTs. We have also to foster the creation of sectoral CSIRTs and all these kinds of things. We have to have organization measures. For example, you have to have one body, one entity that's responsible for cybersecurity in the country. You have to have a policy or a strategy on how to address all the challenges. You also have to address the capacity development. You have to have a workforce, because you know that when it comes to cybersecurity, the gap, the lack of workforce qualified it's something very important, and it's increasing. Also, you have to do awareness, because everyone, not only the public sector, not only private sector, but also users, have to be aware of the risks and how to protect themselves. And finally, you have to address cooperation, because these crimes, these incidents, they don't know borders. So without cooperation, bilateral, regional, and international cooperation, we cannot address and combat these incidents and these crimes. So just to have one idea, the first one, Brazil was in the 5th position, but of course, the index has changed, has improved a lot. So many countries start to participate and to answer the questionnaire itself. The second version, Brazil, uh, 70th position. And finally, in the last version, Brazil ranked 18th position, the 3rd in Americas, and this position reflects the developments that I mentioned before. We have a national policy on information security, we have a national cybersecurity strategy, we are doing, for example, national cyber drills, we do have seen the emergence of sector regulations, and of course, many more developments. And finally, I just wanted to share with you that we have a big change that was approved in the World Development Conference last month in June in Kigali. So we are not longer going to see countries individually rank in this global cybersecurity index, and the results are going to be shown. The results are going to be represented in tiers as a way to incentivize countries to keep up with the development of their all the pillars, right? The legal measures, technical measures, cooperation measures, capacity development measures, and also in the organization measures. So thank you very much. And since we do have, it's academic event as well, I just also have posted some references that show all the developments that I have mentioned, and I'll be happy to share the slides. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, not only for the stellar presentation, but also for being perfectly on time. That's excellent. The need also for capacity building, which is usually the weak link in cybersecurity strategies. And then it's also very relevant to stress, again, that's from the Global South, also good news can come, such as this pretty stellar advancement of Brazil from the less than 70th position in the global ranking to the 18th, and now only behind United States and Canada in the Americas region. So excellent news from Brazil, but a lot of challenges still ahead. Now, to keep on our conversation, I would ask Professor Mohamed Chowki and Judge also Mohamed Chowki to take the floor. He will speak about a very unfortunately very neglected dimension of cybersecurity, at least geographical dimension, and cybercrime as well, from the Arab countries in the African continent, which are enormously relevant, not only in terms of population, but also in terms of usage and adoption of technology, but frequently neglected in international debates. So please, Judge Chowki, the floor is yours. I think we have lost Judge Chowki. I think this reminds us actually of the challenges of the Global South in terms of connectivity, which is probably the main one when we speak about digital technologies. I suggest maybe we proceed while we wait for Judge Chowki to rejoin in Zoom. I suggest we, as we were already speaking about cooperation and capacity building, I think this provides us a very good segue to keep up the conversation with Professor Andrea Calderaro from EY. So I think maybe we can proceed with Andrea and then go back with Mohamed as soon as he will be able to join again.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lucas. Thank you for organizing the roundtable. Indeed, I'm Andrea Calderaro, Senior Lecturer, Associate Professor at Cardiff University and currently at the European University Institute, where I lead a research cluster on cyber diplomacy and digital transformation in the Global South. And these are exactly the kind of contributions that I'm going to provide to the roundtable today. And the issue is exactly kind of zooming out from the discussion we just had with Vanessa. I'm going to reflect on how we're going to be sure that international cooperation in the cyber domain will benefit from voices from the Global South. When I reflect on international cooperation on the cyber domain, I always like to remind myself, and that's what I invite the people attending the session today as well, remind ourselves how transnational is the internet infrastructure. It's transnational because of its physical infrastructure. The internet is made of internet submarine cable built by cable operators and run by telecom operators that build cables in international sea waters, exactly not to be bothered by national legislation and national regulation. The internet is transnational because it's software. The routing of data does not care about the legal framework, does not care about national borders. Data are routed based on trade agreements and technical protocols negotiated by the technical community. So this means this will bring us to a variety of considerations and discussions that we might have, but specifically today for our discussion on cybersecurity, this all means that even when country, as we just discussed also in the Brazil case, they develop their own cybersecurity capacity, which is still, of course, crucial. It's important also that state actors increasingly engage with other communities that actually operates, makes the internet functioning, and also negotiate with the technical community that negotiate technical protocols. So this is exactly why it's so important to approach international cooperation in the cyber domain as a transnational governance approach on cybersecurity that needs to be inclusive of a variety of actors involved in the functioning of the internet, but also needs to be inclusive of actors from the Global South, given that, as Luca, you already pointed out, most of the internet users are already located in the Global South. So because of that, there is an increasing interest in building cyber security capacities. The ITU index has been already mentioned by Vanessa, is one of the many methodologies existing in assessing cyber resilience capacity of countries by a combination of indicators that provide scores that give a bit an idea on the level of cyber capacity per country. And here we can clearly see how countries in North America, which consists of Canada and US, are more cyber ready or cyber capable than countries in the Global South, which is of course highly problematic given that, as we mentioned, most of the internet users are already physically located in the Global South. But the problem is that most of the cyber capacity building initiatives have in the last years, or at least this first wave of cyber capacity building efforts, interested in building a national cybersecurity capacity, which has been, of course, a key priority for obvious reasons, developing of a computer emergency response team, developing, designing legal frameworks that makes states able to govern also their cybersecurity framework. But this is clearly not enough. If we agree that the transnational governance in cybersecurity needs to engage with actors beyond state actors. And this means that we need to move on and invest more in building cyber capacity of actors, industry, or even civil society, to create a multi-stakeholder community dealing within national framework, because the protection of the cyber is a shared responsibilities, but also engage even further with the international cooperation, the growing international cooperation in the cyber domain. Now, when it comes to digital diplomacy, we need to reflect a bit more what actually cyber diplomacy is all about. Because most of the approaches dealing with the cyber diplomacy refers to the first definition that you can see here on this slide, the use of diplomatic resources and performance of diplomatic functions to secure national interests. The problem that I do have with this definition is that take a traditional approach on diplomacy, on diplomatic practices. Give for granted that diplomatic practices are led by, or diplomatic negotiations are led by traditional diplomats in a multilateral fora that represents the interest of a country when it comes to the protection of its security. But this is not enough. If we agree with the inputs that I already shared about the need to engage with communities beyond state actors, it's clear that we need to broaden the concept of diplomacy and try to involve different actors and consider different typology of negotiations that we traditionally experience in the internet domain as part of a diplomatic effort. So this is exactly what I've been reflecting for in this volume that, sorry for the self-promotion, but I needed some color on this slide, let's say. And the internet diplomacy is a concept that tries exactly to reflect a bit further on this and try to broaden the concept of diplomatic practices, specifically in the internet context, where there is a need to reflect on the role of actors beyond state actors in negotiating the variety of issues that make the internet functioning as it does. Now, when it comes to gap, back to the story that we need in order to strengthen a transnational governance approach on cybersecurity, we need from one side an increasing number of actors involved in these negotiations, but also an increasing number of countries from the Global South having a say on these processes. And one of the examples that is useful to pick, just to give a bit of a picture of this trend, is the negotiations happening in the context of the UN open-ended working group, for example, which has been a 3 years long process, a multi-stakeholder process involving not only the UN member states, but also representatives of industry and civil society, to negotiate or to support the UN in designing the first UN treaty on cybersecurity. The first cycle of the UN open-ended working group has been completed last year, and the new cycle has just started. And actually, the session will happen next week in New York. So as we can see from this slide, these are the number of statements coming from governments and statements over in the previous UN open-ended working group. We can see a clear gap of contributions to this process. The situation is even worse when it comes to statements coming from civil society members, representatives of civil society. Here we can see that actually members of civil society were statements provided by civil society were limited to a specific part of the world. The situation is not any better. Actually, it's very similar to other fora where other issues related to the functioning of the internet takes place. When it comes to ICANN meetings, for example, this is another kind of a snapshot of contributors to ICANN, variety of ICANN negotiations that happen at the ICANN general meetings. It shows us a very similar trend to the UN open-ended working group. So of course, there is many more data that needs to be collected in order to offer additional evidence on the need to invest further in building an internet diplomacy capacity worldwide. So far, if we look at the investments on cyber capacity building, we see where these investments, which area, which region, continents have targeted this investment on cyber capacity building. Not surprisingly, countries in the Global South were the main beneficiaries of this investment. But when it comes to the typology of cyber capacity building, what kinds of cyber capacity building this investment try to develop, we see that we are still at the stage where we invest in building, in targeting state capacity, building a legal framework on cybercrime, technical capacity, and so on. And only 6% of resources are invested in cyber diplomacy. And this, of course, tells us a lot on how far we are to achieve an inclusive and transnational governance approach to cyber security. So this means that, to conclude, this means that there is still lots of room to improve, as we say, the cyber diplomacy capacity beyond state actors, and trying to strengthen a multi-stakeholder approach in international cooperation in the cyber domain. We also clearly need to make possible that the multi-stakeholder community is not only effective to strengthen a national cybersecurity capacity, but also to be able to engage further in international cooperation in cyber domain. But also we should also be aware that we need to make this effort also more sustainable, because it's a moment where everybody are interested and investing in cyber capacities, and we should avoid the risk to duplicate efforts. So a major coordination in cyber capacity building investments is also going to be particularly useful. Thank you.
The key relevance of cooperation of multi-stakeholder processes, the benefits that in terms of enhancing quality of policy making and policy implementation, this kind of multi-stakeholder process may lead to. I think it was very telling, your slides on stressing where the statements from states, but even more from civil society organizations actually come from in so-called supposedly global open-ended working groups. At the end, we see that most of the statements come from a very small number of countries, and even civil society, primarily from organizations based in the US, which is very interesting information to analyze. Now, before entering into the open debate, let's see if now Judge Choki can hear us and can
Yes, I am here, Professor Luca. Do you hear me?
Wonderful. Yes, very well, very well. Excellent.
I switched off my video. Yeah. Okay.
Excellent, excellent. Please go ahead. The floor
Thank
is
you
yours.
very much. Yeah, I will. Yeah, I will share my slides. Thank you very much, Professor Luca. I will be presenting on cybercrime in the Global South, more specifically on the Middle East countries, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates. So generally speaking, there has been a rapid escalation and intensification of cybercrime activities originating in as well as targeting the Middle East and North Africa region. Such activities are economically and financially, as well as politically and ideologically motivated. While the Middle East and North Africa region currently is a relatively small source of international cyber attacks compared to Central and Eastern Europe or Asia, hackers in the region have been involved in some high-profile attacks on domestic and international targets. At the same time, the Middle East North Africa region has also been the target of several high-profile cyber attacks. As we all know, the Stuxnet worm, which was designed to attack Iran's nuclear power plant, is among the highly visible examples of malware that target the region. Some countries in the Middle East are classified as countries with a high risk of being a victim of cybercrime. The region's other important features include underdeveloped regulatory framework and enforcement mechanisms, which are considerably different from most other economies. Economies in the region are also characterized by a lack of cybersecurity orientation, with exception to Saudi Arabia, which is ranked the second top country worldwide in 2002 in the field of cyber security, and United Arab Emirates, which is the first country in the Arab region to enact a cybercrime legislation, and finally Egypt, which has a specific fully detailed legislation in cybercrime and is cooperating with Interpol and international law enforcement organizations to tackle cybercrime and organized group. In the Middle East, Gulf countries, which are associated with rapid digitalization systems, have made the region an attractive cybercrime target. According to Trend Micro, do you hear me?
Yes, can hear you very well.
Yeah, according to Trend Micro, there were over 740,000 active infected machines in the Gulf economies. In Saudi Arabia, there were 33.58 million internet users in January 2021. The number of internet users in Saudi Arabia increased by 1.3 million between 2020 and 2021. Internet penetration in Saudi Arabia stood at 95.7% in January 2021. There is no doubt that by the increase in the percentage of internet penetration, more users will be targeted by offenders. Cybercrimes targeting cellular devices are also increasing rapidly, since the penetration rates of such devices are high in these economies. And according to Norton, 20% of cyber attacks are occurred through mobile internet in the Gulf countries. This should be looked at against the backdrop of rising mobile transactions in the region, as well as a rapid escalation of mobile malware. If we have a look at the development of cybercrime legislations in the Middle East North Africa region, countries are classified into three main categories. Many countries, unfortunately, don't have any legislation to fight against cybercrime. Others have traditional legislations that are being used to tackle cyber crimes in addition to traditional crimes. Finally, few countries such as Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates have adopted specific cybercrime legislations. In the Middle East and North Africa, many cyber attacks target Middle East, North Africa economies for the simple fact that these economies are rapidly digitizing and integrated with the global economy. For instance, United Arab Emirates customers were affected when stockbroking service E-Trade experienced a DOS attack in December 2011. The lack of cybersecurity orientation, such as failure to report cybercrime, is also a very important issue of concern. One estimate suggested that at least 75% of United Arab Emirates residents became victims of cybercrime in the previous years. And according to Norton, only 20% of cybercrime victims reported the incidents to the law enforcement agencies. Likewise, 53% of respondents reported that they lacked cybersecurity software in their systems, and only an estimated 8% of mobile users took security precautions. From the cybersecurity perspective, there are many developments on the institutional front in the Middle East, North Africa economies that are encouraging. In 2006, the United Arab Emirates became the first Middle East, North Africa country to pass a legislation on cybercrime and cyber terrorism, the law number 2 of 2006, the cybercrimes law. This law has articles dealing with money laundering and terrorist finance. Saudi Arabia followed the United Arab Emirates in 2007. These economies are also continuously revamping their regulative institutions. In October 2011, Bahrain introduced a bill which includes tough punishments of cyber crimes. Punishments include 10-year imprisonment, sentences, and fines of up to Bahraini dirham 300,000 dirhams. Economies in the Middle East and North Africa region are also engaged in international cooperation and have signed various bilateral and multilateral agreements to enhance cybersecurity. In 2010, Turkey signed the Convention on Cybercrime. Egypt is soon expected to join the convention. The United Kingdom and Kuwait have signed a memorandum of understanding that will involve close cooperation in cyber crimes and related areas. Likewise, US federal agents have worked closely with the Middle East countries such as Egypt and Turkey in cybercrime cases. As is the case with the rest of the world, cybercrime is becoming a growing problem in the Middle East and North Africa region. Compared to other economies, more cybercrimes are being committed by citizens of the Middle East, North Africa economies and are driven by non-economic logic. In terms of the ideological influence, cyber offenses originating from the region and the government cybercrime-related regulatory frameworks are remarkably consistent. The strategies of cyber offenders as well as regulators are more influenced by non-economic rather than economic logic. For one thing, such a tendency is likely to shift the power balance towards religious groups. Likewise, compared to other parts of the world, hackers in the region are less interested in committing cyber crimes for money. That's very important. This aspect was clear, and I will give you the examples. When hackers claiming to be from the Arab region in January 2012 posted credit card information of Israelis online as a gift to the Arab world. Their goal was to hurt the Israelis' pocket, but they did not show an interest in using the credit cards themselves. So in conclusion, we can say that policymakers in some of the Middle East, North Africa economies seem to be in denial regarding the seriousness of cyber crimes in the country. On the other hand, governments and businesses in other countries have developed and established products and processes to enhance cybersecurity. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Egypt use encryption in their national identity cards. Banks in Saudi Arabia and Egypt send warning messages about phishing attacks by SMS almost every day to customers. Finally, while all the above developments are encouraging, regulatory frameworks of most Arab countries have not been harmonized regionally, and these economies are far from ready to participate in the global fight against cyber threats. More importantly, we would argue that the issue is not of the existence of cybercrime laws, but of enforcement mechanisms. There is a big gap between laws in the book and enforcement capabilities. While cybercrime laws in the Arab region offer basic legal measures, they lack details of technical and procedural measures required to prosecute cyber criminals. I have finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Justice Choki, also from your very interesting perspective, not only geographical perspective, but also professional perspective as someone that frequently has to deal with cybercrime cases and prevention. And I think what's a very interesting point that you were raising, besides the fact that, of course, the enormous expansion over the past decade of internet access and digitalization and connection to internet, both of individuals and devices, has expanded enormously the potential surface attack that cyber criminals can exploit. But I think what is most interesting here in your presentation is that the motive behind the attacks are increasingly not being merely economic motives, but religious or or terroristic motives that can usually overlap with terrorist activities, which is something that not all countries consider, but it is a preoccupation that indeed has to be included into the picture. Now, to start after these excellent presentations, to start our let's say 15 minutes of question and answers. First, I would encourage all the participants that are watching the live stream or here in the Zoom chat to Zoom to include in the chat, in the question and answer chat, their questions. And to start, one question that is addressed to the all the participants, which is, what is the most pressing obstacle to achieve solid cybersecurity governance in your geographical area, be it Brazil or Latin America for Vanessa, or MENA countries for Judge Choki, or well, more global maybe perspective, and even at the UN level, maybe we can wonder for Andrea. Please, maybe we can start with following the order we had foreseen: Vanessa, Mohammed, and then Andrea.
Thank you, Luca. I think it's a great question, and speaking on my personal capacity, I think for Brazil it's quite easy to indicate, and I think that we need a law. We need a cybersecurity law, and the reason why we need a law is because we are a federation, and when it comes to cybersecurity, we cannot address only, for example, through the bodies and entities of the federal administration. So we need a law that can engage the municipalities, the states, of course, the federal level as well. And also we have to engage private sector. And of course, all the users, all stakeholders. So we cannot address cybersecurity as a federal organization, because one, like a major attack can start with a user, can start in a municipality, can start in a state. And for example, if it's attack that it targets São Paulo is our economic center. So, and it can have like, it can easily become something very chaotic for the country. So I think we need a law that establish all this governance at a national level, because we do have a national strategy, but this strategy, since it's a decree, a presidential decree, it cannot mandate states, it cannot mandate municipalities, it cannot engage private sector, it can only engage the bodies and entities of federal administration. And of course, we have to have an organization that is also be able to address as a national concern as cybersecurity is. And of course, this entity also has to have all the resources to do it. So I think this would be the main challenge to Brazil, to have a law to be able to engage all stakeholders from all levels of our organization, and also to have an institution that has all the appropriate resources to deal with this challenge.
Yeah, so
back
indeed,
to you.
Indeed, that is a common concern in Latin American countries, and especially in Brazil, the lack maybe of a general regulatory framework, but also of precise attribution of budget and responsibilities in order to create a sound governance structure. Excellent, Vanessa. And then, so let's move to the MENA area. Judge Choki, what would you suggest is one of the main obstacles that impedes achieving such a sound governance system?
Yes, that's a very important question. Let me tell you that we currently in the Middle East and North Africa countries, we have only 14 countries that have adopted specific legislations to tackle cybercrime, only 14 countries. That's a big obstacle because cyber offenders find loopholes in the legislations, and they use servers and websites that are hosted in countries with no legislation, like in case they commit cyber crimes, they would not be prosecuted by laws. That's a very important. It's important to adopt the specific legislations to tackle cyber crime and not to rely on traditional laws, because traditional laws can't be applied. Currently, we are in 2022 and we will have 2023 after some months. We can't rely on traditional legislations to prosecute cyber criminals and to prosecute offenders. I think Arab countries and Middle East, North Africa countries and African countries must adopt specific legislation. That's a point. Another point is the signature of bilateral and multilateral conventions. That's a very important for the search and seizure of digital evidence, for the prosecution of offenders. I think these are the two important obstacles that we currently face in the Middle East, North Africa region.
Indeed, actually, you also stress a very important point, which is cooperation, and also the lack of effective cooperation mechanism. I mean, besides the convention, the cybercrime convention of the Council of Europe, we have very few effective tools. I mean, even if we take Africa, there is a convention of the own cybercrime and the protection of personal data, but it is not enforced yet because not a sufficient number of signatories have signed. So, exactly. So we all know how difficult it is to achieve this kind of international efforts, and I think that is a very good segue for Andrea, that has been deeply involved in this international discussion, primarily at the UN level. Please, Andrea, the floor is yours.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, I missed to mention that I was part myself in the UN Open Working Group, and so have been involved in a variety of discussions that kind of try to address your question as well. That is actually the title for the next potentially roundtable, because we need to discuss much more. I mean, we need more time to reflect on this. I mean, in my talk, I kind of address what is one of the issues that are still missing. So engaging more reinforcing cyber diplomacy capacity in order to build a transnational governance approach on cybersecurity. I believe that this is still something that we need to invest more. One thing that could be done even further is the obstacle that I see in doing that is the fact that discussions around cybersecurity are, how to say, it's like that we need to demilitarize the debate on cybersecurity. I won't say desecuritized, but somehow going in the same direction, because protection of cyber is not necessarily dealing with the protection of state sovereignty. And this is crucial to understand, because until we don't understand this, we're going to still delegate state negotiating issues that they are not responsible for. They cannot negotiate the functioning of internet submarine cables, but most of the what really concerns me is how internet submarine, how to protect submarine cables, because that is, it shows the fragility of the internet infrastructure. But until we do not understand that, in order to do that, we need to engage with additional actors. That is highly problematic. I see that we still debate international cooperation in the cyber domain, approach cyber in silos, and the community do not sufficiently interact with each other. And this is the real work that we really need to do more. Well, not us, but the people responsible for that.
Excellent. And actually, we can follow up, because there is a question that is directed to you. So there is one of our attendees, an anonymous attendee, that has stressed, well, it was particularly pleased with your presentation, and but stresses that in the when dealing with the Americas region, we have frequently no stats or graphs, concerning the Caribbean region. And do you, are you aware if this kind of information exists somewhere, or do you have it?
Yeah, please drop me an email. I'll be happy to share the information that I have on that specific region.
Excellent. So we can also maybe add your contact information in the chat. Now, I'm mindful of time, and even if we started with 5 minutes of delay, it's now 6:12 in Rio de Janeiro. So I think we are almost wrapping up. So I would like to thank very much our panelists for the excellent presentations, and remind that this webinar has been recorded and will be available and shared by friends from Yale and New York University, and also by us at CTS FGV. I also would like to invite you to join us for next governing conversation webinar that will be on 18th of August, and will be dedicated on cybersecurity in the Brics countries. So Brics are, of course, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And we can see them as a sort of G7 of the Global South. Actually, it would be much more appropriate to say G5, but we will discuss how these leading emerging economies will tackle or are tackling cybersecurity, which kind of convergence is emerging amongst them, and how their agendas have been shaped over the past years, and with some relevant evolutions taking place. So I would like also to thank publicly our friend David Moore, that has been the huge engine behind the organization of this webinar and the next one. So thank you very much to everyone, to all the participants, to all the attendees, and to all friends from New York University, Yale, and FGV. And I will see you in some weeks for the Governing Conversation webinar on cybersecurity in the Brics. Ciao, ciao.